you've gone to the point in this course where you now understand where the funding mechanisms are, both within the federal government and in state and local governments, foundations. There are many different types of funding opportunities. But what you need to know is how to present your ideas in the best way to assure that the reviewers will select your application or recommend it for funding. And remember, most funding opportunities have a limited amount of money and a great amount of competition. So you're going to have to present yourself in a way that is a cut above the competition. There are different types of criteria that are used to evaluate different types of grants, whether it's an R01 grant for original research initiated by the investigator, whether it is a training grant for doing dissertation or postdoctoral research and getting additional training, whether it's part of some other funding opportunity. You need to read the instructions carefully, not only to find out how to go about writing the grant application, but there will be a section there in the announcement often about the review criteria. It's very important to read those criteria and then put yourself in the place of a person sitting on a grant review committee. Those are the people you're writing for, in part, because if you can't present yourself in a way that convinces them that your research is worth a recommendation for funding, then you're not going to get through the initial part of the review process, which often eliminates half of the applications even before they're discussed by a review committee. So for training grants, the criteria go something like this. There's a requirement to describe the applicant. That's the person you're evaluating. That's the person who wants to get funding. There's another section for the training plan. There's another section for the sponsor and another section for the institutional environment. And finally, often in federal grants, there's a requirement that people specify that they are going to get training in the responsible conduct of research, which is the subject of this particular course. And it would serve well for you to be evaluating other people's grants, because now you know what goes into training in responsible conduct of research. What I'm trying to get you to do here is think of yourself as a critical reviewer of somebody else's application. And you're going to have an exercise after this which asks you to do exactly that. The grant application that you will review describes an applicant and that person's training plan and the sponsor and the environment and the RCR training. All of that is in there. What you need to do is look at it critically and say what's a strength and what's a weakness of each of these particular sections. Is the applicant somebody who's worth investing in? Is the research training plan something that's pretty mundane? They're going to take some courses, they're going to do this or that. Or is it something that stands out as being interesting, innovative, original, path-cutting, whatever? So remember that your job as a reviewer is to find the best applications. And if you can do that, then you have fulfilled your role as a reviewer. Now, think of yourself as an applicant. Are you just trying to fulfill the requirements that are stated in the announcement? Or are you trying to convince a particular reviewer who is charged with finding the best possible grant applications and throwing out all the rest. So put yourself in the place of a critical reviewer. Look at the applicant critically. Is the person just a routine student, or is there anything in that applicant's description that makes them a cut above in somebody who's promising and is going on to a career in science and a Nobel Prize? Is the research training plan going to provide the applicant with the knowledge and training needed to have an impact on the field? That's what the reviewers should be looking for. Is the sponsor somebody who's done good research, who's mentored students, who can provide the type of institutional environment that is going to bring this person up to another level? So those are the things that you need to apply to a critical evaluation of a particular application. And if you can do that, you're going to learn how to write a better grant application yourself for a training grant. Finally, we want you to consider how somebody looks at the research plan. And the research plan itself is what is called in an R01 application the approach. And it's evaluated in terms of the methodology, just the same way you would evaluate an article submitted to a journal. Is the literature covered? Is the hypothesis clearly stated? Is the question important? Are the methods adequate to answering the question? And are the statistical analyses appropriate? So you need to be able to look at the approach, but also put it in the context of significance and innovation. And significance, again, is it trivial, or is it something that's going to have an impact on the field? And innovation means, is it an original idea that is going to lead to a new line of research, or is it a hot area to investigate? Is it a new technique that's going to really allow us to get a different view of stuff that's been already studied? That's what you as a reviewer should be looking for, and what you can learn about how, or what you can learn from in order to become a better applicant for a grant yourself. So how can we understand how reviewers of either article submissions or grant reviews, how they think? And here we need to think about the whole review process. When it comes to grants, a review process starts with a call for applications, an RFA, request for applications. And those are usually thought out by the funding agency and then issued. There's a timetable involved and a set of instructions. At the same time that the RFA is issued, there's an expectation that grants will be submitted. And with that expectation, the funding agency goes out and finds reviewers. The reviewers are people who have experience in reviewing articles, reviewing grants, or sometimes they're new to the process, but they've been recommended by somebody else. Reviewers are given 5 to 10 applications to study, usually about a month in advance. Once they get the applications, they're told to make sure there's no conflict of interest, and they are also told to make sure that they are qualified to evaluate that particular application. But usually, based on the reviewer's CV, they're getting an application where they've done a lot of research in this area. So reviewers are people like yourself who are prepared to evaluate articles and grant applications in their own area of expertise. And they might get 5 to 10 applications, which they have to read in a month. And they have to write a review, usually as a primary author or a secondary author, or a tertiary author of a review. So a primary reviewer is somebody who presents the results of their evaluation at a review meeting first. They get up and they say, I've reviewed this application and here is my conclusion. Secondary reviewers don't have to describe the application, but have to describe the strengths and the weaknesses and then decide what their overall recommendation is. Tertiary reviewers read the application and give a rating. When your grant is reviewed, at best it's going to get reviewed by 2 or 3 people. Even though the committee might have 10 people on it, only a few of them have actually read the grant application from beginning to end. So it's important to be able to convince only 1 or 2 reviewers that your application is a cut above. Now you have to remember that the initial reviews are going to be shared. So what happens is that reviewers are evaluating other people's grant applications, but they're being evaluated themselves, and they have to appear to be critical. Nobody wants to go to a grant review meeting and seem like they're unprepared or have missed fatal flaws in somebody else's application. So reviewers often have a kind of a social need to present themselves as being highly critical, much more critical than they would perhaps ordinarily. That's the role they're asked to play. You need to be able to make sure that the reviewers, even if your proposal has flaws, are somehow going to be persuaded that your application is a cut above. And that's the way to get through this process initially of a grant review committee coming together and throwing out half the applications because 1 or 2 people thought that it wasn't very good. No discussion whatsoever. The other half are reviewed critically, and the pros and cons are discussed usually in about 15 minutes. And most of the vote that is taken is going to depend on the opinions of the primary and secondary reviewers and perhaps somebody else who read it as well. So you need to convince 2 or 3 people that your application is a cut above the others. And you need to be able to make sure that even if your application has flaws, they can be corrected. So a lot of times when reviewers look at applications, they may say that, well, this grant is adequate, it has good statistics, good methods, it's well written, it does all the things that are appropriate, but there's nothing great here. They can't disallow that grant. They can't reject it. What they do is often vote to kill it by having a priority score that's below the funding level. And again, what you need to be able to do in your grant is be able to get the primary and secondary reviewers to get really passionate and excited about the grant. So what they don't tell you in preparing a grant application is how to grab the attention of the primary and secondary reviewers. And that requires excellence in your methodology, a well-written proposal, but also ideas that inspire passion. And if you can do that and you're presenting something new, innovative, and significant, you're going to have a much better chance of getting your own grant applications funded. So with that, what we're trying to do is to get you to think critically about other people's research, but in going through the process of reviewing other people's research articles for journal submissions or other people's grant application, you can learn how to play the game yourself and how to do what needs to be done to actually get funded to do your training or your research. Good luck with your critical evaluations that come in the exercises with this week's topics.